Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session which focuses on analysing the world's top airports and understanding their formula for success. As an ex-airline guy, I'm completely aware of how important punctuality is and that we're running behind schedule at the moment, so I'll do everything I can to make up a few minutes on this particular sector. Of course, from an individual's point of view, there are several different ways in which you may choose your own ideas of what is a top airport. And I'm sure that everyone here today will have their own opinion on this question. For this session, though, we're going to start off by considering these questions. Which measures are the most appropriate to evaluate an airport's success? How are the airport rankings perceived and what purpose do they serve? Are top-ranked airports the most successful? What is the formula for a successful airport? And what are the elements required to produce a winning strategy? To help us answer those questions this afternoon, I'm pleased that we have experts from 3 different backgrounds here to help us. Frans Knudsen from the civil engineering company Ramboll, Iyad Hundaye, the head of airport IT business development for Amadeus, and Leon Favre, who, when he's not our master of ceremonies, is the director of the consultancy firm One Blue Horizon. As I say, there are many ways of choosing what you consider to be a top airport, so let's hear some opinions. I'd like to start with Leonard, so perhaps you could start the ball rolling for us.
Thank you, Tom, for your introduction. To start this panel, I was thinking about which perspective we have to talk about. Are we considering being an airport to think about the success? Are we talking the angle to be a passenger or to be an airline? Because measuring the success, I think the success factors are different. I will, at this initial stage, play the role to represent somehow the airline. The airline, and I think it was this morning one of the key discussion is to have a big catchment area, because to be successful, the airline will analyze not necessarily the brand name of any infrastructure. They will of course assess the safety and security for operation, but then they will make sure they will be able to get enough passenger to fulfill the aircraft, whatever the size is. And I think it's from a success factor perspective, the most important thing. The second one, obviously, and I think one of our predecessors earlier mentioned it, is about cost. When we talk about, for example, the low-cost carrier, usually, because it's an exception in the region, they are considering what we call Tier 2 airport. That means airport with some brand name, but the most important factor is the cost. They want to reduce the fees, the landing fees on the airport, and at the same time, they want to avoid that the aircraft are staying too long on the ground. Because to make money, as everybody knows here, the aircraft need to be in the air, need to fly. I mean, using tier 2 airport is a very important success factor. It's not necessary again to have a big name or to be Dubai. And in the region, we have, I think, a good example with an airport like Sharjah and Al Arabia. Mr. Ali earlier also mentioned about it, but unfortunately, due to the success of Sharjah airport, not only on the passenger but also the cargo, slowly the airport is saturated. Again, the success factor is to have an infrastructure offering good rates, good fees, good services, and also good capability for the airline to have smooth operation without to waste too much time. At least it was my introduction from an airline perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. Frans?
Okay, thank you very much. As you know, the there are a number of different surveys and awards to benchmark airports around the world. And very often these benchmarks are used for PR and marketing. The criteria for success, however, the criteria for success depends on the stakeholder you ask. As we have also discussed earlier today, there are a great number of stakeholders related to airports. And there's not one single criteria which can describe the success as such for an airport. Let's start with the shareholders, the owners of the airport. Of course, they expect a satisfactory return on the investment, but the expected return depends to a wide extent on the ownership of the airport. Is it a state-owned airport or is it a privately owned airport? State-owned airports focus, of course, at the bottom line, and they focus on a satisfactory return, but the focus is less strict than when you look at private ownership. There are different, what we call PPP, private-public participation, and FBOT ownerships, concession agreements, etc. In all these cases, you have a private capital included in the financing or involved in the financing. And the private capital expect a return on the investment. I'll give you an example from the airport in Copenhagen. It was for many years until the end of the 80s owned by the state of Denmark. But then it was corporatized and an Australian pension fund came into the picture. And of course the focus changed. There was a much stronger focus at the bottom line. And it became more profitable. I mean, Copenhagen Airport became more profitable. And it was a success criteria for the owners. The passengers have, of course, their own success criteria. They want a great number of destinations, connections, and frequencies. They want a common airline and airport approach to the service provided to the passengers, a balanced experience. They want swift passenger handling, both with respect to point-to-point traffic and transfer market traffic. Of course, an attractive design of the airport and shopping possibilities, shopping malls, etc. That's normally the criteria which are used in the surveys which are published and which are used for PR. But there's another market segment which should not be forgotten, and that's the cargo market. Do you know that only 5% of the weight of international cargo is carried by air, but 35% of the value is actually carried by air? 35% of the international cargo. So the cargo market is important, and the airport should pay attention to the success criteria, especially with respect to cargo. It includes efficient cargo handling facilities, especially in the express cargo market, which has special requirements. 24/7 handling is required. The airlines also request efficient passenger and aircraft handling, good slot times or available slot times at the times when the airlines want to fly to the airport. The charges should be reasonable. And then there's an issue which has not been discussed until now, also the importance of participation of the airport with respect to marketing support, route development support, and a cooperation with the tourism destinations. Again, let me use my own airport, Copenhagen Airport, as an example. 3 carriers from the Middle East wanted to start traffic from Copenhagen last year, and we had a survey and a discussion with these Middle East carriers, and they all said that the involvement of the tourism organization and marketing support, one way or the other, from the airport was decisive for the choice of the route and the opening of the route. Then, of course, there's a stakeholder, which we call the state or the city. The success of an airport for a state or a city is that the airport can support export and import initiatives, that it can support foreign direct investments, that there is an employment effect, and that the airport can be integrated in the urban development. And then, of course, finally, on the list of stakeholders, all the non-aeronautical entities in the airport have a success criteria. They want, of course, turnover, revenue, and profit, and the airport should support that. So the point of this presentation is to say that the airport should, to the extent possible, satisfy a great number of criteria at the same time. Of course, it's impossible to satisfy all, but the success of the airport relates to the simultaneous focus at all these criteria. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Leo. Thanks for the gentlemen here. They've actually mentioned a lot of excellent points, and I would add a few points into the discussion that we're having today. I think it's key to the success of airports is the support that it gets from the local authorities and the governments. Today, airports do not need to be burdened by taxation. There has to be support from that perspective. Also, from the civil aviation perspective, there need to be support to airports by signing bilateral agreements with other countries, allowing new networks to be opened and therefore attracting more airlines to the airport. If we look at it from a different perspective, which is the perspective of passengers, so if we look at what are passengers looking for from the airport, there are multiple surveys that have been conducted by airport IT vendors and by IATA that clearly shows that there is a huge interest by passengers to be more in control of the passenger process, meaning introducing self-service solutions into the airport. This could cover the whole aspect of passenger processing, including check-in, including baggage drop, and boarding processes. Today we see a lot of the successful airports introducing such solutions into the airport. Another key success factor is mobility. I think today the majority of the passengers do hold mobility very close to and dear to their hearts outside of the airport. So it's extremely important to ensure that the airport allow the passengers to carry this process and this experience that they have, mobility experience, into the airport, thus allowing the passengers to utilize their mobile devices throughout the passenger process solution or the passenger processing. Another point is data sharing. Today, airports are in certain aspects are blind to the amount of passengers that are flowing through their airports. They know this at probably one or few days before the passengers actually show up to their airports, to the doors. A lot of the data that they rely on is speculative data, is data that's coming from statistical and from history. And if there is today some sort of systems that will allow the airlines and airports to start to share data for the benefit of passengers, this will allow the airports to better manage their capacity. It will allow them to better introduce services to their passengers, and it will give them a better visibility of the type of passengers that will be passing through their airport. This will benefit them in one way to transform the passenger from just a passenger that's passing through the airport into a customer of that airport. Thus, the airport becomes a service provider to the airport, to the passenger, and that's key to increasing the non-aeronautical revenue that my colleagues have been talking about. This is in a brief discussion what I would think are the key success factors for airports.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to invite questions from the audience, if I may. Is anyone who has a question for our panel? If you could wait for the microphone to reach you and give us your name and the organisation that you represent. Sir?
Do we have a microphone here, please?
Do we have a microphone for the gentleman?
Peter Westacre, Pembrey Airport, UK. My question is for Ed Hinde. It's on the non-aeronautical revenues. Increasingly, we are seeing in Europe that there is a shift to online buying, certainly in the electronics area. The hypermarkets that sell electronics on the high street are able to offer much better value proposition than the duty-free. So my question is, do you see that there are commercial revenues from merchandising, electronics, tobacco, because the smoking bans in Europe are sort of coming to the end of their life cycle?
Interesting question. I strongly believe in that the airports do need non-aeronautical revenue to continue to succeed. The airports do need other parts of revenue, because aeronautical revenue will always be under pressure by airlines and by civil aviation to be reduced. Thus, the airports, to ensure that they invest heavily in the infrastructure that is required to support their passengers and to the airline, they need another area of revenue, thus the non-aeronautical revenue. Now, non-aeronautical revenue today is, I would say, is not directed to the correct passengers, because passenger profiling is not available to the airports today. So if we can provide the profile of passengers ahead of time to the airports, thus allowing the airports to direct marketing material to this specific passenger based on their profile, this will be a huge advantage to the airport. I'll give you an example. If we know that a certain aircraft is coming from a certain destination, and the profile of those passengers, that the majority of those passengers buy electronics, we can tell the airport ahead of time that this aircraft is coming, whereby the gate that is allocated for this aircraft can be very close to a duty-free shop where the electronics shops are there. Or you can start to send, prior to the departure of the aircraft, if you know the information of the passenger, certain discounts or coupons for these passengers directed towards coming and shopping at this airport. There are also areas outside of the airport, the parking structure. This is a very good area of making money. Today in the US, quite a bit of airports are starting to utilize the parking structure to inject more revenue, non-aeronautical revenue, into their revenue stream. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, just a short, sorry, I have to put this down. Just an additional comment to that. When you look at airports in Europe, on an average, the non-aeronautical income is somewhere between 30 and 50%. But the airports dealing with low-cost carriers, they will have a share of up to, we have seen at German airport, up to 85% of non-aeronautical revenue. And that's, of course, the low-cost carriers, particularly an Irish low-cost carrier, doesn't want to pay very high aeronautical charges. They have even gone so far, this airline, that they want a share of the non-aeronautical revenue, because it's their philosophy that they bring in. I mean, the airline brings in the passengers, so they should have a share of the non-aeronautical revenue. So there's a tough competition about this. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Maybe I can ask one. Going back to what produces a good airport, a top airport, I'd like to hear your opinions about whether public or private ownership delivers the best facility. So, Iyad, perhaps you'd like to start?
I guess today, if you look at the majority of the airports in the world, it's really very difficult to distinguish between a fully public airport and a fully private airport. So in this part of the world, airports are looked upon as assets of the government, and it's a good asset. As you've mentioned earlier, in the UK, those assets have been privatized 20 years ago, probably. I would say that the success factor is not related to the ownership of the airport. It's related to the services that the airport provides, which are the factors that my colleagues have mentioned previously. So an airport that can attract passengers does not have anything to do with its ownership. Thus, it has to do with what type of services it provides to the passengers and to the airlines that will operate out of the airport.
Okay, thank you. Leonard?
Yeah, I was thinking during your word if it's an interaction between the awareness of the airline and the airport or not, because again for most of the, especially in the low-cost carrier model, most of the operators are looking again to get as much as possible of passenger and to pay as less as possible. I think it's a pure low-cost basic model. But at the same time, they need to find extra revenue to compensate. The extra revenue are coming either from the flight system entertainment, it's an option, coming from selling special or getting revenue from extra non-aviation related business like shopping or such kind of things. And also, some of the airlines are looking to make money by adding additional services. That means if you are flying, as an example, in Europe, EasyJet, you buy a ticket and you don't get a seat. Okay, you want to have a seat confirmation reservation, you will have to pay extra. The same for the luggage. I think everybody know, you mentioned an Irish carrier, everybody what we are talking about, Ryanair. Ryanair was even asking the regulator and some of the aircraft maker why to keep the toilet in the aircraft. He was conducting some survey to say, okay, if I start to ask the passenger to pay to use the toilet, what will be the advantage from my perspective? I will be able to add 6. I think one figure I figure out it's around 6 seats more. That means it's an extra revenue. I mean, I think that in such kind of business, especially again in the low-cost model, they are looking to focus on such things. Now, what is going on as a consequence in the other, the traditional airline or the legacy airline, they are also trying to go the same way. Of course, they will never accept to be considered as a low-cost carrier model, but they will try to develop the airline structure. They will try to also, from the personal perspective, to reduce the cost without to be known as a low-cost model. And some again are doing midway, and it's exactly what we have here in the Middle East. In the Middle East, in fact, we don't have really a full low-cost carrier, because again, Fly Dubai operating from Dubai International, you have all the disadvantage to be in a very busy airline. You will have to wait to get the authorization for land, or you will waste a lot of time in departure. The principle of the model, again, as I mentioned in my initial statement, is to stay in the air.
Okay, thank you. And Frans?
Yes, thank you. Well, in my opinion, the private airports will give the most attractive airports. And of course, the investors in the private airport will have a focus at the bottom line. But the private investors will also understand that the way to earn a profit is to meet the requirements of the airlines and especially the passengers. I think that the private investors and financing institutions, they understand the market mechanism. So yes, so private airports will probably give the best airports.
I suppose you could argue what's a private and what's a public airport. Many different.
There are a lot of hybrids because initially the airports were state-owned or owned by municipalities or regions. Then they were corporatized. They were still public airports, and then private financing came into the picture in many airports. But many airports still have a public shareholding of maybe 30 or 35, 40%, but the main shareholders will be external shareholders and investors.
Okay. Are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, thank you. Obviously, there are many criteria for deciding what makes a great airport, and passengers may well have a different opinion to the airline or the airport operator. And in my opinion, there are great examples of airports that are in public and private ownership, but you could argue all day about some airports and which category they truly lie in. Thank you very much to the panel and for you for sticking with us. Thank you.